International Hotel and Tower. The principal architect for this building, a renowned Chicago architect, his name is Adrian Smith. Adrian Smith also designed the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. As we go by this building, look straight up the side of that building. Now picture another one sitting right on top of it. That's how high the Burj Khalifa is. It's two of these. Adrian Smith also designed another building. It's under construction right now in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. It's called Kingdom Tower. It's 2.5 of these. This one, plus another one, plus another half on top of that. All three of these buildings designed right here in downtown Chicago. His offices are right over here at Wacker and Monroe. So the secret is, if you want a really tall building, come to Chicago. Get Adrian Smith to do it for you. On the other side of the bridge here, we're going to see a dark glass and steel building. Right over here. This is the American Medical Association building. It's also the home of the Langham Hotel. But this building is significant because that is the last building designed by the world-famous architect Mies van der Rohe. Mies came to Chicago from Germany in the 1930s. He felt modern buildings should reflect the modern material that they're built with. Shouldn't be cluttered up with all sorts of stone or cement ornamentation. So all of his buildings, glass, steel, usually dark like this. His philosophy of architecture was less is more. And you can see this again. Building's very simple. Straightforward, square, glass, steel, usually dark. He taught architecture here in town. He was the dean of the School of Architecture at the Illinois Institute of Technology, IIT. One of his students, though, apparently not buying what he was selling. Bertram Goldberg, one of Mies van der Rohe's students, designed Marina City, probably the most photographed building in Chicago. Sometimes called the corn cobs of the Midwest. If you look up, you'll see why. Bertram Goldberg's philosophy of architecture was, there are no right angles in nature, so there should be no right angles in architecture. All of his buildings, round, swirly, curvy like this, no right angles. Those buildings were completed in 1967. If you've had a chance to walk around, there's literally thousands of apartments and condominiums all over the downtown area. In 1967, nobody lived downtown. Those were the first two major residential buildings in downtown area. Back in 1967, nobody lived down here. Those buildings pretty much got the movement kicked off. This is where I park my boat too. I wish. This is the American Bar Association building. Principal architect for this building was Bruce Graham. Bruce Graham also designed the John Hancock Center. You have seen that on North Michigan Avenue, 875 North Michigan. He also designed the tallest building in Chicago, Willis Tower. We'll see that in a little bit. This is the Reed Murdoch Center, 1914 building by George Nimitz. It's an office building now. It looks like an office building, like an older office building. But when that building was built, it was a warehouse. It was a warehouse for the Monarch Food Company. But it looked nice. It was not a big, hulking, ugly industrial building. In 1908, Daniel Burnham had a master plan for Chicago. It was called the City Beautiful Plan. He wanted buildings along the river to be beautiful. Big pastime over here. I always get a little tense. There's a guy at State Street that occasionally flashes the boats as we go by. So when I see people looking up, I get a little worried. 300 North LaSalle, probably the most environmentally sensitive building in Chicago. It's a 2009 building by Picard and Shilton. It has what's known as a LEED certification of platinum. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Platinum is the highest you can get. If you're an architect and you get a platinum rating from LEED, huge deal. It's like winning an Academy Award. That building is cooled with river water. The river water is pumped in, cools the building, pumped back into the river cleaner than it was when it left. So literally cleans the river. Now this huge, huge building coming up. 1931 building by Graham Anderson Probst and White. It's the Chicago Merchandise Mart. This building, when it was built, was a warehouse. This was the warehouse for the Marshall Field Company. And when it was built, it was the largest building in the world. 4.25 million square feet of space in it. It sits on 5 acres. Up until the mid-90s, had its own zip code, 60654. Today, it is a design center. There's 500 showrooms for residential and commercial furnishings here. It's near and dear to my heart. Before I retired, I spent 37 years in the office furniture business. One way or another, all 37 years of my career, I was connected to this building. So I'm retired now. What building do I go past just about every day now? Merchandise Mart. Just can't seem to get away from it, but beautiful building, a lot of good memories there. We're coming up here on an area called Wolf Point. It's where the main branch of the river splits to the north and south branch. Very important for Chicago's history because this is where Chicago actually started. The very first settlers that came here settled right here at Wolf Point. This is where we got our name. The first settlers always heard the Native Americans referred to this area as Chicaqua, so they called it Chicaqua. It evolved to Chicago from Chicago. Turns out though that Chicaqua was the Native American term for smelly onions. Riverbank back then, loaded with wild onions, wild garlic. Middle of summer, you can imagine what this place smelled like. So we are named after the smelly onions here at Wolf Point. You see a New York hat over there. Guys are from the Big Apple. Chicago from smelly onions. We are going to head down the south branch of the river right now. This is One River Point. Same people who built 300 North LaSalle, the platinum rated building. They designed this building too. This building also has a platinum LEED rating as well. First building coming up here on the right, 150 North Riverside. Take a look at that building. I always say this building looks like it's upside down. The building is 120 feet wide. The base of the building is just 40 feet wide. The building's 3 times wider than the base of the building. This is a very narrow piece of land. Railroad tracks on one side, river on the other side. For over 100 years, nobody put anything on this piece of land because they figured it was too skinny. Nothing worthwhile could be on this really skinny piece of land. James Goetz Partners figured if you could put a building with a really skinny base, you could stick a 53-story skyscraper on this really skinny piece of land. Now, when we get to the other side of the building, if you turn around and look at it from this angle, you get a little bit better sense of what this thing looks like. Very skinny base. And it does not take an awful lot of imagination to figure out a really windy day, this thing's going to be blowing back and forth in the wind. What you don't see at the top of the building, behind all that glass cladding, are water tanks. Tons and tons of water. 747 tons of water. If the building starts going back and forth in the wind, this water sloshes back and forth and dampens the oscillation of the building, stabilizes the building. It's called tuned mass dampers. Sometimes it's called water sloshing dampers. There's 2 buildings in Chicago that have that. This is one of them. We'll see the other one in a little while. But incredible way to stabilize the building so it doesn't go back and forth. This is 100 North Riverside, 1990 building by Perkins and Will. It's built right on top of the railroad tracks. They had a problem though. This side of the building, this end of the building, the other side of this part of the building is over switch tracks. Switch tracks take up a lot of space. They didn't have any room to dig a foundation. They didn't have any room to put caissons down to support the other end of the building. Railroad wouldn't move the switch tracks. So how do you support that end of the building if you can't get a foundation under it? Well, if you turn around and look up, you'll see the trusses at the top of the building. The other side of that building is free floating. Nothing under it. It is hanging off of the trusses at the top of the building rather than being supported underneath by a foundation. There's railroad trains that literally go through there every day. There's no foundation. It is hanging off of those trusses. They occasionally have to go up and take measurements to make sure everything's still where it's supposed to be. Nothing is starting to sag down over the years. It's been up there since 1990. Never had to make an adjustment. Everything exactly where it was in 1990. Now, and then mentioned these buildings are built right on top of the railroad tracks. This is Gateway Center number 1. And if you look at eye level here, you'll see exactly what I mean. Those are the Amtrak and the Metro tracks going into Union Station, right underneath the building. Now it's about 1:30, nice and quiet over here. If you take this tour about 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon, incredibly noisy. All the commuter trains are getting ready to go out. And if you worked in these buildings, you'd think that you would hear all that noise. These trains right underneath your building. But the building's shockproof and soundproof. You don't hear the trains underneath you. You don't feel the vibration of the trains underneath you either. The that was gateway number 1. On the other side of the bridge here, gateway number 2. Now, when we get to the other side of the bridge here, take a look at these buildings. They look like they ought to be Mies van der Rohe buildings. They're dark, glass, steel, no ornamentation on them at all. Pretty much textbook example of what Mies van der Rohe would do if he were designing a building. Thing is, he did not design them. They were designed by Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill. But as I said, he taught architecture here in town. So back in the 1960s, when these buildings were being designed, a lot of the practicing architects in town actually trained by Mies van der Rohe at IIT. So even though he didn't design these buildings, left a really big imprint on the architecture here. See these window washers over here? There was not enough money in the world to get me. I'll bet one of those things. When I worked, I used to deal a lot with union carpenters. Those guys only make about $2 an hour more than the union carpenters. $2 is definitely not worth it going up on the outside of a building. Anyway, get your cameras ready. As soon as we pass this building, in fact, you get a little bit of a preview over here. As soon as we pass this white building, we're going to turn, and the tallest building in Chicago is going to be right in front of us. Of course, it's Willis Tower. Now, back in 1965, it was built as the headquarters for Sears Roebuck. It's called Sears Tower. They stayed here till 1995. They moved out to the suburbs. The Willis Insurance Agency, well, those people started the hope. Willis Insurance Agency, they only occupy about 3% of the building, but they bought the naming rights to it, so that is why it's called Willis Tower now. But tallest building in Chicago, 3rd tallest building in the United States, 1,453 feet high. Notice those 5 glass boxes sticking out. There's people up there right now taking our picture. So don't wave at them. We're taking their picture, they're taking our picture. Right now they're going to see a flash go off. But that's the 103rd floor. It's the observation floor. Those boxes are called the ledge. They're all glass. They're outside the profile of the building. So you can walk out into these glass boxes, see everything around you. The terrifying thing, though, is that the floor is glass, too. So you can look down and you see your feet, and you look straight down the side of the building. You see 103 stories and nothing else. And if it sounds terrifying, I can tell you it is.